We had a discussion this morning. Someone had mentioned that mind is equivalent to ego, and we should try to eliminate ego. If we eliminate ego, mind goes away and no mind happens. So how do you communicate? He implied that you are in a state of no mind.
Okay, all right. So, no, this is not my my position at all. First of all, the relationship between mind and ego. Mind and ego are not synonymous. I've been speaking about the ultimate reality in terms of being most of this week, but let's now speak about it in terms of consciousness. So consider the ultimate primary reality to be consciousness, infinite consciousness, which is formless, silent, empty. Mind, the way I use the term mind would be the activity of that consciousness. So, for instance, if consciousness were likened to a blank screen, mind would be the movie that plays on it. Just as all there is to a movie is the activity of the colorless screen, so all there is to mind is the activity of transparent, silent, empty consciousness. So we could say mind is consciousness in motion, consciousness is mind at rest. So in a human being, mind takes the form of thinking and perceiving. More fully thinking, feeling, sensing, imagining, seeing, hearing, touching, etc. But let's just call it sensing and perceiving. But there may be other kinds of mind. Consciousness might vibrate or move within itself and assume the other forms of mind that we as human beings are not aware of. So what would the ego be? The ego would be the belief that what we essentially are, namely consciousness, is limited by the mind. So you can't have ego in the absence of mind, but you can have mind in the absence of ego. The ego is a belief, not an entity, or more accurately, a belief and a feeling. The belief and the feeling that what I essentially am, infinite consciousness or infinite being, is limited by or conditioned by the content of experience, mind. So instead of feeling ourselves as the pure I am, we feel I am plus a belief, a feeling. So instead of just I am limited, I am lonely, I am a person, I am a man, I am a woman, I am temporary, I was born, I am sick. All of those ideas are ego. They are a limitation of ourself. What is ourself? The pure I am. The ego would be an imaginary limitation of our essential being. So is that clear, the relationship between consciousness, mind, and ego?
Yes, but the mind doesn't go away. The mind is not.
Why would one want the mind to go away?
I don't know. That was the discussion at the table.
If mind goes away, thinking and perceiving goes away. You'd be either dead or deeply asleep all the time.
That's right.
Would you want just to be deeply asleep all the time? I mean, what's wrong with the mind? Isn't the world a beautiful place? Why would you want thinking and perceiving to disappear? Do you honestly think that the height of spiritual understanding is for thinking and perceiving to disappear? I mean, what's the big deal about thinking and perceiving? Why should they disappear? Is it such a great attainment not to think and perceive? What's wrong with thinking and perceiving? It's beautiful. If thinking and perceiving were not possible, we would not be able to perceive a world, or have a conversation, or have a relationship, or taste tea, or feel sunlight, or What's the big agenda with thinking and perceiving? Why would we want that to go away? Yes, we want the sense of separation to go away. Why? Because it's the cause of sorrow on the inside and conflict on the outside. There's a good reason for us wanting the sense of separation to disappear, because the sense of separation is the cause of our sorrow and conflict. But to want mind to disappear, the only part of the mind's activity that goes away on the recognition of our true nature is that aspect of our mind that rises on behalf of the sense of separation. In other words, those thoughts and feelings that rise on behalf of an apparently temporary, finite, separate self, those thoughts and feelings diminish and die out. But all the other faculties of the mind remain. You know, Ramana Maharshi read the newspaper. He had conversations with his devotees. He had thoughts. He had perceptions. The very last words he said just before he died, he heard a peacock screeching on the roof. He turned to one of his attendees and said, "Has someone fed the peacock?" That's the last thing he said. That's so sweet, isn't it? But he heard the peacock. That's hearing, perceiving. His mind was active. He had the thought, he had the feeling. The peacock's hungry. He turned to his attendant. "Has someone fed the peacock?" That's a thought. He was free of ego, but the faculties of thinking and perceiving were still available to him. And in his case, they were used only in the service of God. That's the proper use of the mind. A mind that is in service of the ultimate reality. God, truth, love, however we like to conceive of it. So we shouldn't think of getting rid of the mind. We should think of on whose behalf or in whose service do we use our mind.
No matter how much I meditate, read about this, come to retreats, I'm still so blended.
Blended?
Blended like with my person. Like,
okay, yes.
And when you say something like consciousness doesn't know suffering, how is that even possible? Because isn't consciousness experiencing everything?
Consciousness doesn't know suffering directly. It knows suffering through the mind. Remember, John Smith leads a peaceful life at home. He doesn't suffer when he's alone at home. It's only when he goes to his theatre and puts on the character of King Lear, then he starts suffering. So he only experiences suffering through the character of King Lear. In the absence of King Lear, he's at peace.
Okay, perfect. Can I get in there?
Yeah.
So my person is getting in the way. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about it. This body-mind will always interpret, like it would always veil. I can't just be a naked being, is what I'm getting into. I'm not having that experience of just, how can you be a naked being if there is a freaking person,
Julia, tell us about yourself.
I know where you're going.
No, but go with me. Tell us about yourself. Bearing in mind, as you know where I'm going, we don't want to know about your thoughts, your relationships, your activities, your memories, your feelings, your sensations. Don't tell us any about that, because none of those are yourself. Those are all experiences that you have.
Yeah.
So don't tell us about any of your experiences, but tell us about yourself. When you say, I don't understand this, when you say, I feel this, when you say, what do you refer when you refer to I? Would you agree, first of all, that you have been I all your life?
Yeah.
Okay, but what element of your experience has remained consistently present throughout your life?
I.
Tell us about that.
It's so simple. It's a bit boring. It's not.
Well, it's boring by contrast with the content of experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But try to experience it by itself without reference to the content of your experience. Try to exactly, quiet. Okay, tell us more.
Stillness.
Beautiful, tell us more.
Nothing.
Well,
Yeah.
there you are, you're in touch with your naked being. Quiet, still, empty. That's just naked, aware being.
But then the mind comes in.
That's fine, so the mind comes in. But what happens to naked, aware being when the mind comes in?
Yeah, that's the trouble. It gets completely identified, blended. For example, I will be in the middle of a conversation with a sibling, and all of a sudden I'm completely aware that I'm speaking out of conditioning.
Okay, so you become aware of that. You're speaking out of conditioning, but in the midst of the conversation with your sibling, there's a pause in the conversation. And what if you were briefly, you don't even need to formulate it to yourself, but if you just in a brief pause in the conversation, you to ask yourself, who am I essentially in the midst of this conversation? What would the answer be?
That I am.
Tell us about its three qualities.
I wouldn't have the conversation with my sibling, right?
No, but if in this little pause, you're lost in the conversation with your sibling, but then there's a little pause, 2-second pause, without formulating the question, you ask yourself, who am I really? And in that 2-second pause, you relax the focus of your attention from the content of your conversation. You go back to yourself. And you recognize exactly what you recognized a few minutes ago. I am still, I am at peace, and I am empty. Then you carry on with the conversation. And 5 minutes later, there's another 2-second pause. You don't formulate the question to yourself. You don't need to. You just go back to your being. You taste its stillness, its peace, its emptiness. You go back to the conversation. 5 minutes later, a 2-second pause. And you do this regularly, and then after a while, you notice that the being that you contact in those 2-second pauses every 5 minutes, in the intervening 5 minutes when you're talking with your sibling, that being doesn't disappear. It just goes into the background. And then there's a pause, it comes into the foreground. And the conversation goes over, it comes into the background. There's a pause, it comes into the foreground. And after a while, you begin to recognize it, not just in the pauses, but you feel it in the background. You keep talking with your sibling or your friend, but you feel this still, peaceful, silent being behind the experience. And that somehow conditions the quality of the conversation. You are arguing with your sibling, but then you feel this background. And it conditions your thoughts and feelings. You soften. There's a change in the expression on your face. There's a change in your body language. There's a change in your tone of voice. And your sibling notices this without formulating it. And they also soften. The conflict begins to diminish. You start having a proper conversation.
And I can do the same thing with an emotion showing up with...
Okay, so now you're not having a conversation with a sibling. You're on your own in the grips of an emotion.
Yep.
And emotions, they rise and they fall. You're not always in a heightened state of emotion. So when you're in a heightened state of emotion, you feel you're completely merged with your experience. That's fine. But the emotion diminishes in time, and then there's a pause when it subsides. So when the emotion subsides, in that moment you go back to yourself. When at any moment you go back to yourself is always there. Yourself is like your best friend, 100% loyal, 100% open, 100% available, 100% unjudging. loving, always there for you. Whenever you turn around, she's always there. You just go back to her, go back there. And then something triggers you, the emotion rises again, so you lose contact with your being. It doesn't disappear, it just goes into the background. The emotion takes over in the foreground, then the emotion subsides, and there's your being again in the background. You just touch it again, you taste it again. Oh, it's such a relief. Your body relaxes. Then the emotion is triggered again, and so on. But then in time, you begin to notice that even as the emotion is triggered and as it's rising, this background of peace is still there. To begin with, it's in the background of the emotion, but in time it begins to pervade the foreground of your experience. It begins to infiltrate your feelings and soften your feelings. Doesn't mean to say that you don't feel sad or lonely or upset sometimes, but it's increasingly pervaded by the peace in the background. And at some stage you feel that this background peace is not just something you visit from time to time when you're taking time off from your relationships and emotions. You begin to feel that you live there.
That's what I want.
It begins to be, like I said, right at the end of the meditation, we make our being our home, the place we live, our refuge. We still have conversations, we still have emotions. You still get lost in your emotions from time to time. It's okay, but you never lose yourself for long, or you lose yourself for less and less time in them as you become increasingly established in your being. Julia, it's not taking so long. Most people get to the end of their lives without ever noticing the peace of being in the background of experience. You're almost there. You have everything you need now. There's nothing else for you to understand. There's nothing else for you to do. There's nothing else for you to practice. Nothing else for you to read.
The aspect that I connected with is separation, wanting to include the world in my being. This is what I heard this morning. And I went out and walked around and tried it, and it didn't work. And, I think it's not only this morning, but it became clear that a lot of the suffering comes in me from that sense of separation. I'm not the only one, obviously, you said it, but it's becoming more urgent to find how to remove that barrier.
I just don't know how to say more clearly than I did this morning that there's only one being, that each object or each particle or each thought or each feeling doesn't have its own little package of being. This glass doesn't have its own package of being, that when the glass disappears, the being disappears. It's like imagining that every object and character in a movie has its own separate screen. No, all the objects and the characters in the movie, they all share the same screen. In fact, they get their reality from the screen. When you touch the tree in the movie, you don't really touch a tree, you touch the screen. The screen is the reality of the tree, of the person, of the rock, of the house, of the car. One screen that lends itself, so to speak, to all the appearances. Well, it's the same. There's just one being. Think how many beings there would have to be if every particle had its own package of being. And then when each particle or object disappeared, its being would obviously go with it. But where would its being go? What would it vanish into? If you put a block of ice in a bucket of water, the ice vanishes into the water. It has to go somewhere. If If the being that belonged to this glass, if the glass disappeared, where would its being go? Or if the glass was broken up into thousands of pieces, would being be broken up into thousands of individual pieces? No, no. You can't break being up into you know that from your own experience. Your being is always one, yes? Is your being ever divided? You have lots of thoughts and feelings, but isn't your being always one? Isn't it always whole?
Yeah.
Isn't it always indivisible, unbreakable, imperturbable, indestructible?
In experience, I feel divided many times.
No, your thoughts are divided, but your being, you feel your being is divided? Tell us about into how many pieces is your being divided? How many beings are there in you?
No, just one.
It's all one. Hasn't it always been the same? When you say, I am now, isn't that the same being that you referred to when you said, I am yesterday?
Yes.
And when you said, I am the day before?
Yes.
And when you said, I am when you were 40 years old, and 30 years old, and 20 years old, and 10 years old, and 2 years old, whenever you say, I am, wasn't it always the same being?
Yes.
Has anything ever happened to that being in your life?
I don't know where I'm stuck. Like the drop loses itself in the ocean. It becomes no more drop. It becomes the ocean. That's the being.
Yes.
And
But
so
nothing happens to the water. The drop is just a temporary name and form of the water. The drop doesn't become the ocean.
it's always water.
The drop is always water.
Okay.
So it's the same. The water is being. And everything and everyone is a temporary name and form of that being. Would you agree that whatever there is?
Yes.
So isness is the common factor in everything. Thoughts, feelings, atoms, molecules, stars, planets, galaxies, whatever there is. It is, but there's just one is, or one being. Everything is a name and form of that. Every time you feel love, that's what you're feeling. When you feel that you love someone, do you not feel that what separates you, at least temporarily, dissolves, and you feel one with that person? That's it. You're feeling, what you're really feeling, without formulating it as such, is that the two beings that you seemed previously to be, and which was the source of your conflict, have now been recognized to be the same being. In that moment, the conflict dissolves, and you feel love. That's what love is, just the recognition of our shared being. So you know that the experience very well, but you give it the wrong interpretation.
The fear of dissolving, perhaps, was stopping it.
It's true that the apparently separate self fears this dissolution because it realizes that as it dissolves, it dies. However, there is only one emotion in the separate self that is stronger than its fear of dissolving, and that is its desire to dissolve.
I think that's what I'm feeling now.
Yeah. It's like, let me illustrate that. It's like the moth and the flame. Mm. The moth sees the flame in the window, and there's one thing the moth wants more than anything else. The only thing the moth wants is the flame. So the moth goes towards the flame until it's 6 inches away from the flame, and then suddenly this recognition: if I have in order to have what I want, I must become it. I must die into it.
Yeah.
So suddenly its love for the flame becomes its fear of the flame. And it goes back again. But as soon as it goes away from the flame, it feels, but that's all I want. And its love for the flame overcomes its fear, and it goes towards the flame again. And then it gets 6 inches away, and it realizes, in order to have what I want, I must die into it. And this fear comes up again, and it goes back. But then when it goes back, it realizes, but all I want is the flame. And it does this dance for a while between love and fear. That's the ego. The longing to dissolve and the fear of dissolving. The longing to dissolve and the fear of dissolving, until sooner or later it gets tired of this dance, and it has the courage just to give itself to the flame. Give yourself to the flame, you won't regret it.